Okay, guys, this is the last of 3 videos that are companions to the PDF. The full lecture with embeddable, clickable links about the causes and consequences of World War I. This video lecture is not required. However, the PDF PowerPoint with clickable links is required, and you need to be prepared for activities and assignments coming from this. Reminder, one more reminder, we'll begin having assignments and tests administered through AP Class, My AP Classroom, the week of April 6th through 10th, so you need to confirm. You can log on to the College Board. All right, so you can access these assignments and tests. If you have any problems, email me. Be specific what your problem is, and if I can't help, I'll find someone who can. So let's get going with this last PowerPoint. We're going to be looking at the end of the war, Versailles Treaty, Spanish flu pandemic, situation in the Middle East, and end up with China and Japan. So, USA in the war. Inexhaustible supply of troops and supplies. We don't come in until 1917. The rest of the world's been fighting for 2.5 years, using a lot of their colonial troops. All right, so I am not going to talk through every slide. I am only going to go over things that I need to focus on. Take the time to open up your PDF and read these. So what I'm going to talk about is the Spanish flu pandemic, but the first thing I need you to do is pause this video and open up that PDF and click on the link and watch this video. This is a comparison of the 1918 influenza pandemic with COVID-19. Don't forget your reading assignment that I sent you about school closures in 1918. See you in a moment. Okay, a little background on the discovery of viruses. They actually started exploring the nature of viruses and infections in the late 19th century. I talked about Louis Pasteur. He developed vaccines to fight anthrax and rabies. And I talked earlier about Edward Jenner, who developed a vaccine for smallpox. But they didn't know that viruses existed. The first evidence of the existence of viruses came from experiments with filters. All right, and they had pores small enough to not let bacteria through. All right, in 1892, one of these filters showed that the sap of a diseased tobacco plant remained infectious to healthy tobacco plants, despite it being filtered. So something was getting through. It was trapping bacteria, but it was letting something get through. In the early years, they were referred to viruses as filterable agents. Only later was the term virus restricted to those agents that required a living host, somebody like a human, for propagation, for that virus to grow and spread. By the way, the term virus, which is a Latin word meaning slimy liquid or poison, this is the beginning of the science known as virology. Now, although the virus that caused the 1819 flu pandemic was not discovered until the 1930s, the descriptions of the disease and research proved it was to blame. This pandemic killed 40 to 50 million people in less than a year. But the proof that it was caused by a virus didn't happen until 1933. I'm a history teacher. I'm not a scientist. Please Ask your science teacher if you have more questions. Those of you taking AP Bio right now, you know the lady to go to. She can help you. So here's the big deal. I've been telling you this since the first day of class. Just think like a human being, all right? It doesn't matter what time period it is. People were and are motivated by the same desires and emotions. You can use this to help you on the AP exam. You are living history right now in the light of COVID-19, of the coronavirus. First, here's some random history facts from me. All right, did you know that back during the plague years, the Venetian merchants would force ships to dock in the harbor for 40 days before letting the sailors enter the city? The word quarantine is actually, it comes from the Italian word for 40, quaranta. So that's where we get the word quarantine. One example of how doctors and nurses treated the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic was rolling hospital beds outside so the patients had fresh air. This is due to the belief, partially, that the disease spread through miasma, what was called miasma, or bad air. This had existed, belief that existed back to the Middle Ages. You know, but remember, before we left for spring break, I talked to you about the discovery of bacteria germs that took place during the second industrial revolution, you know, the mid-1800s to the early 20th century. Do you remember watching the video on the cholera outbreak in London? And it was due to contamination, bacterial contamination of a water pump. This led to improvements such as sewer systems, clean water, and improved infrastructure. That's testable on the exam. In 1918, the discovery of the virus that caused the pandemic was still over a decade away. I told you all that before spring break. Now, let's make some connections. How does COVID-19 relate to AP's content that will be tested on this year's AP exam? Question: where did the coronavirus, COVID-19, it's called COVID-19 because the virus was discovered in 2019, in December 2019, by the way. Where did the coronavirus, COVID-19, originate? Where do you think? You know, in China. So here's another question. Well, how did it spread throughout the world, including getting to the USA? You're living history. You know the answer. Through the movement of people around the globe. Question: how and for what reasons do people move around the globe? Why were they leaving China? What would be one reason? Why would somebody go from China to Italy, or Italy to Spain, or Spain to the US, or China? What are the reasons? Travel. Technology such as airplanes and faster ships. Airplanes don't come until the 20th century. They're not going to be tested. But steamships from 1750 to 1900 sped up immigration to the United States. And another major reason is trade. You knew this stuff. So can you answer essentially the same questions in the context of what you need to know to pass the AP exam? Let's see. This is a quick question. AP exam review for 1200 to 1450 CE, the post-classical era. Here's your question. What disease spread during the period 1200 to 1450 CE? Bubonic plague, the Black Death. So question, well, how did it spread? Why did it spread? You know the answer. Through trade from Asia into Europe. An example would be along the Silk Road that was being maintained by the Mongols. Remember, diseases spread when people move or migrate. This is an environmental effect. Humans' interaction with the environment. So if you're thinking of pieces, political, interaction between humans and the environment, economics, cultural, oh, I forgot what else. Here is the objective, what you need to know. There was continued diffusion or spread of crops and pathogens, including epidemic diseases like the bubonic plague, Black Death would be another term, along trade routes, and I added such as the Silk Road. Be prepared for an activity to be administered the week of April 6th through 10th through My AP Classroom. Confirm you can log on to your College Board account. So let's try it again. AP exam review, except this time for the early modern era, 1450 to 1750 CE. Prompt. Identify one example of environmental diffusion during the period 1450 to 1750. The Columbian Exchange. Prompt. Explain one environmental effect of the Columbian Exchange on indigenous Americans during the period 1450 to 1750. The lack of immunity to European diseases resulted in the death of up to 90% of indigenous Americans. There is the learning objective for 1450 to 1750. Explain the causes, search for trade, alternate trade routes, and its effects on the Eastern and Western Empire, hemispheres. So there's several effects. We'll be reviewing those. Not going to be on the AP exam this year, but it is part of our curriculum. The 1918 Spanish flu pandemic originated in the USA. How did it move? It moved across the globe as U.S. soldiers went to fight in World War I. It actually originated in an army camp in the United States. Remember, networks of communication, transportation, and exchange. That's products, that's ideas, that's culture, that's religion, that's disease. Whether it's a Silk Road, whether it's an airplane, whether it's a steamship, whether it's the Panama Canal, whether it's the Suez Canal, whether it's the Grand Canal, and I'm sure I'm missing other examples that are networks of communication, transportation, and exchange that will be tested on the exam. So, casualties. There was new science that came out of World War I. Pause my video, click on the link, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. So real quick, I'm going to go over Wilson's 14 points. This is the President of the United States. This is what he wants. He wants terms. He wants to resolve all future wars. And he said, this is how we have to do this. We're going to have to end secret treaties. Can't have any secret treaties. Everybody has open freedom of the seas. Nobody can claim that. He wants free trade, be able to buy and sell. He wants arms reductions. We need to lower the level of arms out there, these new devastating weapons. Self-determination. Groups get to decide for themselves, new nations, how they will be governed. And then he wants a League of Nations. This is a forerunner of the United Nations, where all the nations can come together and resolve issues. We kind of talked about this in 1750 to 1900 after Napoleon, and we talked about the Congress of Vienna and how they wanted all these countries to get together to stop anything happening again like what happened in France. They could have joint actions. So the League of Nations. So at the Paris Peace Conference, you have the big three, the winners, the USA, Britain, and France. Wilson said he wanted peace without victory. And before I go any further, I'm just going to say the failure of this treaty is what caused everything to come after it. I'm one of those kind of historians who really, in a way, at heart, think we're still fighting World War I. We are actually still in World War I. It'll be called something else, in my opinion, 500 years from now, because this peace treaty bombs it. He wanted his 14 points the basis of the treaty. But what did Britain want? Britain wanted to keep control of the seas and its colonies. France wanted to make darn sure Germany never threatened France again. Britain and France literally want to just take it all from Germany. Germany is going to have to pay for the entire cost of the war. It's called reparations. All right? Now, we know the four causes of World War I: MENA, militarism, imperialism, nationalism, and the alliance system was not just practiced by Germany. It was practiced by all the combatants. Wilson compromised, but he kept pushing for a League of Nations. So here's the failure of the Treaty of Versailles. Germany was to take blame for the war and pay reparations, $300 billion in 1919 money. It leads to a worldwide Great Depression in the 1930s. It limits the size of the German military. They have to give up German territory to France, particularly Alsace and Lorraine, which right today is eastern France. If you go there, though, a very famous dog is from Alsace. They call it an Alsatian in Europe. However, in the United States, we call them Alsatians, and that kind of, we call them German Shepherds. So you can see eastern France was a territory that's going to move back and forth in World War I and World War II. This all will lead to German resentment, and it leads to World War II. Watch this short video, pause this, and I'll be back with you in a minute. So other settlements that came out of the Treaty of Versailles. So there is self-determination. Russia is going to lose Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. You're going to get those, all right? The beginning of the Cold War, Russia's going to take them back. The Austro-Hungarian Empire is going to lose what becomes a fake country called Czechoslovakia, Austria, Hungary, and Yugoslavia, another fake country created by the Versailles Treaty. Japan comes out ahead. It's actually an ally in World War I. It gets control of some Chinese territory and all the former German colonies in the Pacific. That's just going to whet their appetite for more. And you get the British and French mandates of German colonies in Africa and the lands of the Ottoman Empire. British and French mandates in the Middle East lead directly to the problems that we have today. The League of Nations. This is new international organizations are formed to maintain world peace and foster international cooperation. Now, there were 40 nations in the League of Nations. They did have the League of Nations. Wilson got that through. The purpose was to negotiate disputes, joint actions, could be economic sanctions, could be military interventions. But the United States Congress fails to ratify the Versailles Treaty. We aren't in the League of Nations. Their reasoning, only Congress had the right to declare war, and the League of Nations would allow military interventions. The League of Nations will fail. When you don't have the world's #1 power as a member, it is doomed to fail. The result is going to be World War II. This is the aftermath of World War I. Pause this video, click on the link in your PowerPoint, and I'll be right back with you. So, as I told you, I'm one of those historians who believed we're still fighting World War I. Why? Because the Versailles Treaty failed. You're going to get World War II. You're going to get the Korean War. By the way, we're still in technically war. This is a truce signed. Cold War, the Israeli-Palestinian War of 1947 that still is ongoing, the Vietnam War, the Persian Gulf War. It's now called the First Iraqi War. The Bosnian War, and we're going to talk about genocide in Bosnia in the 1990s. The Iraq War, we call it the Second Iraq War. Technically, it ended in 2010, but we still have forces in Iraq, advisors. And then Afghanistan. Technically, it ended in 2015, but we still have forces there. What about ISIS, the Islamic State? So let's look at the new Middle East. This used to all be the Ottoman Empire. The rise of extremist groups in power led to the annihilation of specific populations and acts of genocide or ethnic violence. Now, I'm going to talk about the Holocaust in World War II. But here's another example. This is considered the 20th century's first genocide. There were some Armenian Christians who sought to have their own state separate from the Ottoman Empire. Self-determination, nationalism. They were suspected of being pro-Russian by the Ottomans, and they started mass deportation. Turkish soldiers gathered Armenian men, women, and children and sent them on forced death marches into the desert. As many as 1.5 Armenians died. Picture in the bottom right-hand of the screen came from a former Rowlett student who was a band member, and they went to Chicago on a band trip, and it was the anniversary. You see it's 2015 when this picture was taken, and he was on the band trip, and he sent me a picture, a text with this in it saying, "Oh, Miss Osborn, look what we're looking." We had just finished studying this in class. So this was a protest trying to get modern-day Turkey to accept responsibility for mass deportations. This becomes a model for Adolf Hitler. When he was writing Mein Kampf, he was asked by Rudolf Hess, his secretary who recorded it, well, wait a minute, Fuhrer, we can't, mein Fuhrer, we can't do that. I mean, you know, what about what happened to the Armenians? You know, everybody was mad about that. He says, nobody's going to remember that. Pause the lecture, click on the link, and I'll be right back. So the rise of modern Turkey, nationalist leaders and parties in Asia and Africa sought varying degrees of autonomy and independence from imperial rule. Mustafa Kemal, nice hat down there in the right-hand corner, he formed a nationalist government in 1919 and abolished the Ottoman Sultanate. He created modern Turkey. This is the only part of the Ottoman Empire that's going to gain independence. It becomes a secular republic. It introduced European laws, had a written constitution. Remember, we talked about Tanzimat reforms in 1750 to 1900. He reduced the power of the Islamic clerics. Constantinople is renamed Istanbul. He replaced the Arabic alphabet with the Latin alphabet. He westernized the Turkish family, the roles of women, and even Turkish clothing and headgear. That's called a fez that he has on his head. It's successful in the urban areas, in the big cities, but not the countryside. Islamic traditions remain very strong there, conservative traditions. This is the same anywhere. If you are in our city, big city, all right? I think we just heard 3 million, 4 million in the Metroplex area, something like that. We have a tendency to be a little more liberal than if you go into deep East Texas. Has a tendency to much more conservative. So here's the biggie, the mandate system. Why all the fighting in the Middle East? The dude in the bottom right-hand corner That is Lawrence of Arabia. Recommendation, one of the greatest movies of all time. Lawrence of Arabia. So in 1917, Britain's going to support what's called the Balfour Declaration. It's an establishment of Jewish homeland in Palestine, but he tried to limit immigration, and Britain only ended up ticking off both sides. So Britain starts going after resources. They're going to take Baghdad, the city of Baghdad that had been the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate back in 1200 to 1450. You remember that time period, and they're going to get control of the Iraqi pipeline. Egypt and Arabia will gain independence in 1922-24. Former German colonies and Ottoman territories were given to the great powers as mandates, and this is where we get into the problem. Arab-speaking territories of the former Ottoman Empire believed they had been promised independence if they supported the Allies during the war. In practice, Britain will take control of Palestine, Iraq, and Transjordan. France will take Syria and Lebanon as its mandates. The USA has nothing to do with this at this time. But as those European empires collapse after World War II, we will inherit the problem and the ire of the Middle East. So here's a map of different territories that were taken up. Pause this video. Here is a short, funny YouTube. This is from the Daily Show. Trevor Noah hosts it now, but Jon Stewart used to. And this is John Oliver explaining, or Sir Maps-a-Lot, explaining the mandate system. I'll be right back with you. Click on the link. We're almost done. So, the last thing we need to cover is Japan and China. And in a future PowerPoint, I will go into more depth. But where are they sitting at the end of World War I? So China is going to have a revolution. All right, the Qing Empire is going to collapse. There's too many people, not enough resources. Remember, blood in the water. Anytime there is a weakness, there will be a shark. There's a revolution in the Qing dynasty is overthrown, the end of dynastic rule. In 1911, the Republic of China is established with Sun Yat-sen as the president. They're not doing really well because they're growing poor, because the treaty ports like Shanghai, Canton are controlled by the West or Japan. They're doing great, but not China. Sun's successor, Shanghai Chek, will split with and destroy the Communist Party faction in the Republic, in the government. And that's going to set off future problems. Mao Zedong. They have this great plan to industrialize, but there's corruption. Remember the signs that lead to the decline of an empire. You have threats on your borders, you have corruption, you have a huge gap in wealth between the rich and the poor. These are all signs that they're going to lose the mandate of heaven. We'll find out who is going to take advantage. Hint, hint, Mao Zedong. Watch the video. Click on the link. I'll be right back with you to end this PowerPoint. So last thing, I'm going to throw you out what's going down in Japan after the World War I. So remember, I told you they're a bunch of volcanic rocks. All right, they don't have a lot of natural resources or farmable land, fertile land. At the Paris Peace Conference, they allowed to get to all this territory, seized German colonies in the Pacific, and they even went into some of the German enclaves. Remember what an enclave was? In China. They forced Chinese government to sign the 21 demands, which means they had to accept Japanese influence. Japanese prosperity depends on foreign trade and on imperialism in Asia, demand for raw materials and markets. So we're coming back to them. So, crash course video link, time period link, and we are at an end of World War I lecture, video lecture. If you have any questions, please ask me. These will be uploaded to Google Classroom, and they are a companion with the PowerPoint PDF. All right, which I will make available to people on the outside through the website teacheroz.com. Y'all take care. I'm going to stop this recording, and hopefully I'll get better at this. See you in online class.